Hello, Delfino Camacho, Communications 120, Advocacy speech on private prisons. Private prisons are unusual in that they add financial incentives toward incarceration, and cruel in that they have been proven to be detrimental to prisoners individually and the prison population as a whole. The United States, in order to set an example, should enact a federal ban on for-profit prisons. The main argument in favor of privatization is that allowing the practice would ease financial burden on the government. However, studies have found this reasoning to be false, and in fact corporations will routinely cut corners, oftentimes at inmate and employees' risks. As noted in Tag 1, this is the real reason private prisons should be outlawed, by Joseph Margiles, Professor of Law, Cornell University, Time Magazine, August 24, 2017. Quote, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates points out that private prisons compare poorly to facilities run by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The Department of Justice found that, in general, private prisons provide fewer correctional services, add greater security and safety risks to inmates and staff, without producing substantial savings. To achieve their modest savings, private prisons tend to cut back on staff costs and training. More than a decade ago, researchers found that private facilities pay their officers less, provide fewer hours of training, and have higher inmate-to-staff ratios, a combination which may account for their much higher turnover rate among correctional officers, as well as the uptick in inmate assaults. This is the conventional critique of private prisons. They do not deliver on their promise of significant savings, and the greater risk far outweighs the small fiscal benefits they provide to those within the walls. End quote. With profits as opposed to savings as the driving force, private prisons tend to maximize cost cutting to the detriment of the prisoners. Evidence of profits being put before prisoners' welfare can be noted in Tag 2, Private Prisons Are Archaic and Cruel, Jackie Lacey, former LA District Attorney, Los Angeles Times, March 19, 2019. Quote, CEOs and shareholders of private prison companies have an incentive to minimize investments and maximize profits for shareholders, which can result in cutting corners to lower operating costs, including worse treatment of inmates. A 2016 report from the Justice Department found that private prisons regularly failed to ensure inmates were receiving medical care. They reported more than twice as many inmate-on-staff assaults as in state-run prisons, and reported a 28% higher rate of inmate-on-inmate assaults. At La Palma Correctional Center, a private prison in Arizona that holds California inmates and immigration and custom enforcement detainees, a 2010 State Inspector General report discovered that the facility overused solitary confinement, provided insufficient services, and had numerous security issues. End quote. Employees also suffer as a result of private prisons. These added complications can lead to further costs for the government, and worse yet, harm to an employee, as noted in Tag 3, The Corruption Within Private Prisons, Eliana Poliak, Catalyst Project, January 6, 2020. Quote, the corporations running these private institutions claim they save the government money and use what money they receive for the betterment of the prisoner, but their true focus is on protecting the bottom line. In order to lower operating costs, these facilities cut corners, hiring fewer employees and paying and training them less. Private prison employees earn an average of over $5,000 less than their government-employed counterparts and receive 58 fewer hours of training. This leads to higher employee turnover and decreased security in the prisons. A 2016 report from the Justice Department found that private prisons had twice as many illicit weapons when comparable to federal facilities. End quote. Prison is punishment, but also rehabilitation. The intended goal is not to return once a prisoner has served their sentence. With profits on the line, facilities have incentives to keep prisoners longer than their public counterparts. Evidence of this can be noted in Tag 4. Study finds private prisons keep inmates longer without reducing crime. Peter Kerwin, Lafayette School of Public Affairs Law School, June 10, 2015. Quote, with private prisons being paid on the basis of each occupied bed, there may be financial incentive for the operators of those facilities to maximize the number of days served for each prisoner, which may not be in the best interest of the state. Subquote, there is a basic fairness issue here. Should prisoners be serving more time simply because they were randomly assigned to a private prison instead of a public one? Asked Mukherjee, the lead researcher on the subject. The number of days a prisoner served relates directly to the cost of housing that inmate. So, if inmates sent to private prisons somehow serve longer term, this undermines the very cost benefit that makes private prisons attractive relative to public prisons. End subquote. The research found that prisoners in private facilities had an increase in their sentence of 4 to 7%, which equaled 60 to 90 days for the average prisoner. As an example, with the average contractual payment to private prison operators in Mississippi being $50 for each bed occupied, An extra 60 days added to a prisoner's sentence leads to an average additional cost per prisoner of about $3,000. That added expense erodes about half of the projected cost savings offered by the private prison in the state. End quote. Evidence of the system imprisoning citizens under false or exaggerated pretense in order to receive monetary kickbacks from private prisons has also been found. Examples of this corruption can be noted in Tag 5, Kids for Cash and Prison for Profit, Dr. Sandra Trappin, Professor of Criminal Justice, Penn State University, December 9th, 2017. Quote, in what was dubbed Kids for Cash scandal that rocked the state of Pennsylvania in 2008, 2 judges in Wilkes-Barre County were found guilty of accepting judicial kickbacks, upwards of $2.6 million, for sentencing children to a particular developer of private juvenile detention centers. In this case, the judges pocketed millions in exchange for sending thousands of children to the facility, located in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Out of 6,000 children, an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 received excessive sentences impacted by the judges' crimes. As for the kids, their offenses were typically minor. The violations made famous here helped expose the operations of a private prison system that only continues to grow in influence. End quote. Private prisons failed to deliver on their only redeeming promise, that a for-profit model would alleviate costs for the government. Instead, evidence finds that the for-profit prison model introduces a host of indefensible burdens on inmates and workers, with the only profits going to the companies. I argue there is no fixing this issue via regulation, and instead the government must enact a ban on for-private prisons, as supported in Tag 6, Cashing In on the Convicts. Laura I. Applebaum, Professor of Law, William University College of Law, Utah Law Review, May 1st, 2018. Quote, privatizing corrections monetizes the criminal justice system in a deeply disturbing way. Profiting from the physical incarceration and regulation of other humans, a function normally and properly only performed by a locally elected government, is not only distasteful and often inhumane, but has serious deleterious effects on offenders, communities, and the properly function of punishment in our society. The ultimate goal must be eradicating the profit motive from corrections. End quote. Thank you.